Hey, Joseph, thanks for your work in week 10 and across the entire course. Thought I'd send you a video reply here as we're getting to the end to thank you for participating in the course and hope it's been good for you. Just a brief reply here on what you've written in the second forum. I My guess in terms of your question about why Paul would talk about consecrating a certain day, judging a day, as he says, to be treated differently from other days without saying Sabbath, is that as difficult as it might be for us to imagine, there was, in fact, no like organization of time into weeks of 7 days in the pagan world. And people divided days into different increments depending on the calendars of their background communities that they come from, uh, customs typical of the traditions that they belong to. And it was, in fact, customary to divide up time in a variety of ways, not to designate a day of rest, but certainly days for certain festivals, to honor certain past events. And I think while Paul certainly will have in mind something like the Sabbath that would be too narrow for him to say that it's a matter of uh, Sabbath observance or not Sabbath observance. Instead, it's a matter of how people designate days and the sort of division of time differently. And instead of requiring that people be uniform in that regard across all the diversity that they come from as people of Gentile background in the pagan world, or instead of requiring that everybody be uniform now and observing the Sabbath as Israel had traditionally done, Paul sort of leaves it open and urges the community, I think, to negotiate a way forward that is mindful of the backgrounds and needs of one another without regarding one particular way of dividing up time as normative for everybody. I think there are probably limits to how we could generalize something like this. Um, so I'm not sure that what Paul counsels this community will work for every conceivable difference, not only in how we measure and divide time in our society or communities, but across all kinds of other differences as well, not just diet, with all of the socioeconomic and political associations that would have had in Paul's day, but lots of other differences as well, where simply kind of deferring to one another's conscience might not prove sustainable for a community. But I think this is still sort of like Romans 13. It's good general counsel for a community that is navigating a great deal of diversity and trying to build a life together that will be intergenerational. And that requires a kind of respect for the disparate backgrounds that are represented in the community, different customary commitments. And Paul urges patience, I think, along those lines. So lots of analogs, I think, for us in our day um, that I hope we could learn from this letter about instead of appealing to the Bible, as people might have in appealing to the law or another source of authority similar to that. Instead of appealing to the Bible in our day to sort of decide any supposedly controversial issue, there are many cases in which we need to be able to say that the force of biblical teaching actually depends on where people are coming from and what a certain practice might involve for them concretely in the particulars of their life. Simply appealing to the written word is somehow dictating a certain norm for the community's life. Paul, I think, clearly says will not work and is not, in fact, true to what the written word is for, what it's about. So that I hope is something we can learn from, because especially among Protestants, we often imagine that what we get from the Bible is always a reliable source of general norms for community conduct. And that's just not what the Bible is, I think Paul clearly says here. So in interpreting the Bible, in receiving its authority, there's a whole layer of discernment that is required and that involves a certain care for the conscience of other people, and especially keeping in mind the misgivings that people might have about certain things so that they shouldn't be forced into a uniform way that doesn't quite feel right to them, even if it's not the case that their conscience dictates a rule for the community either. So that's kind of how I'd break that down. Um, Hope that helps answer your question. And again, just want to thank you for your participation in the course. I hope it was a valuable learning experience for you. I'm sorry we didn't get to connect in any of the live Zoom conversations. Maybe the times didn't work for you very well, but maybe our paths will cross in another course. Thanks again.